Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that you probably won't survive unchanged. It's about the kind of dinner that starts politely with candles, clinking plates, and forced smiles, but ends with a sentence that slices through years of effort like a knife through warm butter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It began on a Sunday evening that smelled of roasted garlic and resentment. The dining table gleamed like a stage set for a play we'd all rehearsed too many times. My husband Daniel sat at the head of the table trying to mediate with his usual calm, the peacekeeper, the diplomat, the man who believed family dinners could solve anything if the wine was expensive enough. Across from him sat his mother, Eleanor, dressed in her favorite pearl gray blouse, the kind that matched her tone when she was about to say something she considered honest. I sat to her right, carefully folding my napkin, pretending not to notice how she kept glancing at my hands, as if checking for calluses or proof of usefulness. The chicken was perfectly cooked, though she'd remarked earlier that the aroma was a little too strong. When I passed her the salad, she smiled a thin, decorative smile and said, "You're trying, dear. That's what matters." Daniel didn't catch it. He never did. That's the thing about family tension. Outsiders can feel it immediately, but the people at the center call it normal. Psychologists call that emotional habituation, getting so used to subtle cruelty that silence becomes a coping mechanism. Halfway through dinner, when I mentioned that I'd been offered a small project at the design firm, a freelance job, nothing huge, she put down her fork with a slow, deliberate clink. "Oh," she said. "Another hobby, how nice." Then she looked at Daniel. "At least she keeps busy. Some women would lose their minds staying home all day." I smiled, but my hands shook. It wasn't her words, really. It was the satisfaction in her voice, that quiet, poisonous tone of someone who enjoys watching another person flinch. People still debate whether humiliation is an act of dominance or insecurity. I think it's both. Daniel tried to change the subject, football of all things, but I could feel her gaze on me, dissecting my every move. "Do you even like cooking, dear?" she asked, sipping her wine. "It's an art, you know. My late husband used to say a woman's temperament shows in her food. Too salty means too bitter." She let the words hang there, and I swear I saw the corner of her mouth twitch, almost a smirk. I laughed softly because what else could I do? Then, "I suppose I'm mildly sweet," I said, trying to sound playful. Daniel chuckled nervously, but his mother just nodded. "Mildly," she echoed. After dessert, she insisted on helping with the dishes, though by helping, she meant standing beside me, pointing out how the water was too hot or how I was stacking the plates wrong. There's a rhythm to her criticism, almost musical. 3 beats of silence, 1 barb repeat. The older generation calls it guidance. I call it slow erosion. Somewhere between rinsing a glass and drying a bowl, she whispered, "You know, Daniel had bigger dreams once, before you." I froze, fingers slick with soap. "What do you mean?" I asked, but she only smiled and walked away, humming a hymn. When I finally sat down in the living room, Daniel was flipping through the TV channels like nothing had happened. I told him what she'd said, and he sighed the sigh of a man caught between 2 storms. "She doesn't mean it," he said. "That's just how she talks." That's how he always justified her words, as if tone could erase intention. But the truth is repeated. Pain doesn't get lighter just because it's familiar. That night, lying in bed beside him, I kept hearing that one word, useless, echoing through my head like an unwanted lullaby. Not that she'd said it outright, but it was there, hidden between her phrases, like dust beneath an expensive rug. I thought of how language works, how insults can evolve, camouflage themselves in compliments, and still wound just the same. In the days that followed, I tried to shake it off. I cooked better, cleaned more, laughed louder. Somewhere deep down, I believed I could win her approval if I just performed better, like a student desperate for a teacher's praise. It's embarrassing to admit now, but I wanted her to see me, really see me. Family therapists call it in-law validation, a craving so deep it can rewrite your sense of worth. The irony. The harder I tried, the colder she became. She'd praise Daniel for his steady hands or his reliable nature, but never once mentioned that his steadiness was built on my unseen effort. It's strange how invisibility feels heavier than hatred. That week, she stopped by unannounced, claiming she'd forgotten her reading glasses after dinner. I found her in our living room, not looking for glasses at all, but leafing through the folder of my unfinished design sketches. "Oh," she said when I walked in, "so you do work. I thought it was just a pastime." My throat tightened. I wanted to yell to defend myself, but instead I just nodded. "It's something I care about." She smiled. "Care is lovely, dear, but results matter." That was the night she called me useless for the first time, not to my face, but close enough. I overheard it through the cracked door as she spoke to Daniel in the kitchen. "You married a dreamer," she said. "Sweet girl, but no substance. A man like you deserves someone capable." Daniel didn't reply, not once, just silence the kind that roars. I remember sitting in the dark hallway listening to my heartbeat thump against my ribs. You ever have one of those moments when you realize you're completely alone in a room full of people? That was mine. Funny thing about that dinner, it wasn't a climax. It was a beginning, a small, almost invisible fracture that would eventually split the whole house in two. And even then, I didn't know it. I just thought I'd had a bad night. But sometimes one dinner is all it takes to start a war that lasts years. The days after that dinner slid by like slow-moving rain on a fogged window, quiet, repetitive, heavy. You know how people say time heals everything? It's not true. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to hide the bruise. I woke up earlier, smiled wider, and convinced myself that if I played the part of the perfect daughter-in-law, the tension would melt on its own. Spoiler, it didn't. Instead, it hardened, invisible but sharp like glass beneath carpet. Our house was always too quiet when she stayed over. You could hear the refrigerator hum, the ticking of the old wall clock, and that faint creak in the hallway whenever she passed by my door. She had a way of making her presence feel like an inspection. Every move I made, how I poured tea, how I folded towels, was met with that raised eyebrow of hers. She never needed to say anything. Judgment has a language of its own. Daniel didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. He loved peace more than truth. It's a common thing in marriages, isn't it? One partner becomes the buffer, the peacekeeper, thinking that silence is maturity. People still debate whether silence is strength or cowardice. In our house, it became the flag of surrender. Once I overheard her talking to one of her friends on the phone. "Oh yes, she tries hard," she said in that falsely sweet tone. Bless her heart. Some women just aren't built for responsibility. Then a pause and laughter, her laughter. You know the sound of someone laughing at your existence? It's not loud, it's surgical. That night I confronted Daniel. "Do you hear what she says about me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from breaking. He looked up from his laptop and sighed. "She's old-fashioned," he said. "Don't take it personally." I wanted to scream. Old-fashioned. That's not a personality trait, it's an excuse. It's funny how emotional neglect can feel civilized. There were no slaps, no shouting, just the slow suffocation of never being enough. At breakfast, she'd say things like, "Daniel, you work too hard, you deserve a real meal," while I sat across the table silently eating the food I had cooked. Or she'd say, "When I was your age, I managed the whole house alone," then look at me as if expecting me to apologize for existing in the modern world. There's this psychological term, microaggressions. It means small daily stings that build into one deep wound. That was my life death by 1,000 polite comments. One evening, I heard a thud in the living room and found her accidentally dropping one of my framed sketches. The glass had cracked diagonally clean and perfect. She smiled faintly. "Oh dear," she said, "I suppose it wasn't framed properly." My hands trembled as I picked it up. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't cry over small things, dear. You have so many big things to fix." Daniel entered just in time to see me sweeping up the shards. He asked what happened, and she sighed theatrically. "My fault. I'm such a clumsy old woman." She winked at me as she said it in invisible victory. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning its endless circles. You start questioning yourself in moments like that. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am useless. That word had started to settle into me, quietly nesting in my ribs. It's incredible how easily someone's opinion can become your own inner voice when repeated long enough. Days turned into weeks and the silence became unbearable. We spoke in half sentences filled with unsaid things. When she wasn't visiting, her presence lingered anyway like perfume that clings to fabric. Daniel began staying late at work. Deadlines, he'd say. I stopped asking. Maybe we were both escaping, just in different directions. Then came the family gathering her birthday of all occasions. I bought her a silk scarf in her favorite shade of gray. She unwrapped it slowly, looked at it, and smiled. For a moment I thought I'd done something right. Then she said, "It's lovely, dear. I have 3 just like it." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. That night, when guests left, I sat on the back porch alone. The air smelled of rain and barbecue smoke. I thought about how families can be like gardens. You water them, tend to them, but if one root rots, everything around it eventually wilts. I realized I'd been watering a dead plant. There's a custom in some cultures where the mother-in-law tests her son's wife by giving her impossible household tasks. It's meant to build character or obedience depending on who you ask. Sometimes I wondered if Eleanor was just continuing an old ritual, one that modern life had forgotten but she refused to let die. People still debate whether tradition is guidance or control. I think it's both. By the 3rd month of her extended visit, Daniel and I barely spoke at all. She'd sit in the living room with her tea while I worked in the kitchen, our silences weaving through the house like invisible wires. One morning, as I was about to leave for an errand, she said softly, "You know, Daniel always wanted someone who reminded him of me." I turned around, my pulse rising. "And what does that mean?" she shrugged, stirring her tea. "It means men usually marry reflections of their mothers. You should consider what kind of reflection you are." For a moment I saw red, not metaphorically, literally. My vision blurred, my chest burned, but I said nothing. I simply walked out the door, my hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. That was the moment I decided this silent war wouldn't continue forever. Not like this. I didn't know it yet, but a letter, just a few pages of ink and truth, would become my final weapon. It's strange how love can slowly morph into a performance. One day you're simply loving someone. The next you're auditioning for the role of worthy spouse. That's what my marriage became proof that I deserved to be in Daniel's life. Proof that I wasn't, as she called me, useless. Every gesture started to feel like evidence submitted to a silent jury that never adjourned. I cleaned every corner, smiled through headaches, and hosted dinners like an actress desperate for applause. You'd be surprised how exhausting it is to love while being watched. Daniel still said he loved me, of course. "You're doing great," he'd say, whenever I made some new recipe or helped with his office paperwork. But his words felt transactional, like a performance review instead of affection. He'd never say it when his mother was around, only in private, always quietly, like it was something to be ashamed of. Sometimes I wondered if he even noticed how his mother's approval shaped his every thought. Psychologists call that enmeshment, when a parent's influence is so deep that you can't tell where their opinion ends and your own begins. One night after dinner, I found Eleanor in the kitchen rearranging the spice rack. "You've got oregano where time should be," she said, as if it were a moral failing. "Order matters in everything, dear. That's what makes a home." She didn't look up when she said it, but her voice was thick with meaning. I thought of responding, but what would I even say? That I was tired of being graded, that I was trying to keep a family intact that clearly didn't want me in it, so I stayed quiet. Silence, I'd learned, was its own form of armor, but silence also corrodes. The more I bit my tongue, the more bitter I became. I started writing small notes to myself, scraps of paper stuffed into drawers. Phrases like, "You matter. Don't let her rewrite your story. You are not invisible." It sounds dramatic, but when someone chips at your identity daily, you start building small monuments just to remind yourself you exist. Eleanor noticed the change. She always did. Her eyes were like lie detectors calibrated to weakness. "You look pale," she said one morning over coffee. "Are you unwell or just tired?" It was the pause before tired that carried the knife. I wanted to say, "Yes, I'm tired of trying to impress someone who's already made up her mind." Instead, I smiled and said, "Maybe just the weather." That afternoon, Daniel came home early. "Mom says you've been distant lately," he told me, sitting down beside me on the couch. "Are you okay?" His tone wasn't unkind, but it wasn't curious either. It was investigative, like he was reporting her observations. I laughed softly. "I didn't realize you were both conducting a study." He didn't like that. "Don't make this a fight," he said. "She's just worried." "Worried?" I asked. "Or monitoring?" He looked away. "She just wants what's best for us." There it was again. Us meant her and him. I was the outsider, the guest in my own marriage. You know, in some traditional cultures, a daughter-in-law isn't seen as a full member of the family until she bears a child. I'd read that once, and it stuck with me. Maybe that's why I felt like I was constantly being tested. Eleanor had even hinted once, "You've been married 3 years, dear. When are you planning to give Daniel something to be proud of?" That sentence haunted me for weeks. I started tracking my cycles, adjusting my diet, researching fertility-boosting habits like a woman chasing a miracle she didn't even want yet. Not because I was ready for motherhood, but because I wanted her to stop calling me empty. Daniel noticed my efforts but misunderstood them completely. "You're amazing," he said one night as we folded laundry together. "Mom says you've really matured lately." That word matured made me laugh out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I was being graded again this time for personal growth I hadn't asked her to measure. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Perfect hair, polite smile, hollow eyes. I thought, if this is what being good looks like, I don't want it anymore. That weekend, Eleanor organized a family brunch at her place. Her home always smelled of lemon polish and old money, a museum of her glory years. I brought a homemade cake, hoping to offer something that couldn't be criticized. She took one bite, set her fork down, and said, "Sweet, too sweet." Then she leaned toward Daniel. "You've always preferred balance, haven't you?" He smiled politely, oblivious to the poison beneath the sugar. I wanted to throw the cake in the trash, but instead I just nodded as though taking notes for improvement. That's when I realized I'd turned love into labor. I wasn't a wife anymore. I was an employee in her empire of expectations. That night, Daniel asked, "Why don't you try bonding with her more? Maybe do something together, shopping or lunch." I wanted to scream. I've been bonding with her through emotional survival, but instead, I said, "Sure." Because saying sure was easier than explaining that his mother didn't want a friend, she wanted a mirror. So I tried. I went shopping with her the next week. She spent the entire time advising me on colors that suited my modest frame and clothes that hid the flaws. I nodded, smiled, and carried her bags. When we returned, she hugged me. "See, we're getting along." Daniel looked pleased that night. "I told you," he said. "She just needs time." I nodded again. Time, how ironic. Time was the very thing that was hollowing me out. People say love conquers all. Maybe. But what they forget is that love without respect turns into submission. And submission without recognition becomes despair. I didn't realize it then, but I was slipping into a kind of quiet rebellion. Not with words, not with anger, but with withdrawal. And that's when the past came knocking. Literally. A message appeared on my phone from someone I hadn't seen in years, someone who knew Eleanor before she was Mother Carver, the woman who ruled every room she entered. What she told me would change everything I thought I knew about the woman who called me useless. Her name was Margaret, and she was one of those friends you think you'll grow old laughing with, but lose somewhere between moves, marriages, and mistakes. We hadn't spoken in nearly 10 years. When her message appeared on my phone, short, polite, almost formal, it felt like a note slipped under a locked door. "I'm in town for a few days. Would love to see you. It's about Eleanor." That last sentence stopped me cold. It's not every day someone wants to meet to talk about your mother-in-law. I agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, the kind that smells like nostalgia. Warm pastries, faint coffee, the sound of silver spoons tapping porcelain. Margaret hadn't changed much except for the kind of stillness that people acquire after surviving something heavy. "You look tired," she said softly, reaching across the table. "Eleanor hasn't changed, has she?" I laughed, though it came out bitter. "If by changed you mean found new ways to insult me, then no." Margaret's smile faded. "You know she wasn't always like that." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" She sighed. "She used to be different. Sharp, yes, but kind. Before her husband passed, she ran the community library, volunteered at the shelter, cooked for everyone. But after Harold died, something in her hardened. Control became her comfort. She lost her softness and replaced it with rules." I sipped my coffee slowly. "So you're saying grief turned her cruel?" "Not grief," Margaret said, shaking her head. "Fear." She grew up believing a woman's worth was in her usefulness, what she could do, fix, or manage. So when Harold died, she needed a new project, and she chose Daniel. Then you. Her words sat heavy in the air. For the first time, someone had described Eleanor not as a villain, but as a broken system still running. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it explained the logic behind it, the twisted inheritance of control disguised as love. People still debate whether control is a form of care or a symptom of fear. I think it's both. Margaret told me more. You know, she almost divorced Harold once I blinked. Apparently, she caught him writing letters to another woman, someone he met during a business trip. Nothing happened, but Eleanor never trusted anyone fully again. That's when she started micromanaging everything. She kept every receipt, every bill, even made Daniel account for his allowance. Suddenly, so many things made sense. Why she needed to know how much Daniel and I spent on groceries. Why she always asked about our finances like an auditor. I thought she was just nosy. Turns out she was terrified. Control was her version of safety. Margaret smiled faintly. She loves Daniel in the only way she knows, by making sure nothing happens to him that she didn't approve first. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the slow burn of realization. So she's protecting him from me, from uncertainty, Margaret said, which to her is the same thing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker, thinking about the woman sleeping peacefully down the hall. It's strange, isn't it? How knowing someone's pain doesn't stop them from causing yours. I almost felt pity for her, but empathy doesn't erase the damage. A few days later, Eleanor found out I'd met Margaret. I didn't tell her. She just knew. She always knew things she wasn't supposed to. I heard you had coffee with an old friend, she said at breakfast, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. She's quite the gossip, isn't she? I froze mid-bite. She just wanted to say hello. Oh, I'm sure, Eleanor said, stirring her tea. She's always had opinions about my family. Tell me, did she mention my marriage? Or my son, perhaps? Her voice was calm, but her hands were trembling slightly. It was the first time I'd seen her lose control. That tiny shake in her fingers felt like a crack in marble. You don't have to be defensive, I said quietly. We just talked. She smiled then, but it wasn't kind. Be careful who you talk to, dear. Not everyone wishes you well. And just like that, she'd shifted from accusation to warning, from offense to manipulation. It's a classic tactic, emotional redirection. Turn the guilt outward, make the other person feel wrong for noticing your wrongness. It's practically an art form. Later that afternoon, Daniel came home with that cautious look husbands wear when they are about to deliver their mother's complaints. Mom says you've been talking about her behind her back. I laughed in disbelief. Talking about her, I met an old friend, Daniel. She feels hurt, he said, rubbing his temples. Like you're ganging up on her. I wanted to shout, she's been ganging up on me since the day I married you, but I didn't, because that would have sounded emotional, and emotional meant irrational, and irrational meant proving her right. Instead, I just said, I see. He sighed in relief, thinking the storm had passed. But inside me, something else had started, a quiet, calculating part that was done playing nice. I realized that people like Eleanor never lose power by accident. You have to take it back deliberately, piece by piece. That night, as I lay beside Daniel, I thought about something Margaret had said before we parted. You can't fight her in her world. You have to make her see yours. At the time, I didn't know what that meant, but soon I would. Because just when I thought the war was contained, Eleanor gave me a gift, one that would change everything between us. She arrived that Saturday morning with a smile too deliberate to be genuine. Her car, always spotless, always scented faintly of lavender, pulled into our driveway like a queen arriving at her court. Daniel helped her carry in a large wooden box, old but polished, wrapped in faded ribbon. She said it was something special, her voice full of the kind of theatrical warmth that always came before a jab. It belonged to my mother, she said, brushing invisible dust off its lid. And now I think it should go to you. I stood frozen. She'd never given me anything before, not even a compliment that didn't have a hidden blade. I tried to smile. That's very kind of you, I said cautiously. What is it? She smiled like a cat. Open it. Inside was a set of fine china, delicate ivory plates with a gold trim, the kind that looks more ceremonial than useful. It's a family heirloom, she explained. Every Carver woman has hosted her first real family dinner using these. My mother gave them to me on my wedding day. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly. I thought it was time you proved you could carry on the tradition. There it was, the catch, the challenge wrapped in sentiment. A gift that wasn't a gift at all, but a test disguised as generosity. You could almost admire her strategy. People still debate whether manipulation is cruelty or craft. I think it's both. I nodded slowly. That's very thoughtful of you. She tilted her head. We'll see. The following week became a blur of lists and planning. Eleanor insisted on inviting the whole family, which in her world meant anyone who'd ever shared her bloodline or opinion. Daniel was excited. He thought it was a chance for us to start fresh. I wanted to believe that too. Maybe if I hosted the perfect dinner, if everything gleamed just right, she'd finally look at me with something other than quiet contempt. I spent days preparing cooking, decorating, polishing those delicate plates until I could see my reflection smiling back at me. I even wore a soft cream dress, elegant but modest, the kind Eleanor might describe as tasteful. I told myself this dinner would change something even if I didn't yet know what. She arrived early, of course, wearing pearls and judgment. You've done well, she said, scanning the room, though the centerpiece could be a little taller. It's all about symmetry, dear. I adjusted it obediently, pretending to care. When guests began arriving, I slipped into host mode, smiling, pouring drinks, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Every move was rehearsed, every word careful. I even caught Daniel's proud glance once or twice, those tiny moments that made all the effort feel worth it. Dinner started smoothly. The table shimmered under candlelight. Laughter echoed. For a fleeting moment, I thought I'd won. Until Eleanor raised her glass. To tradition, she said. To the women who keep this family from falling apart. Everyone clapped. Then she looked directly at me. And to those learning what that truly means. It was a toast wrapped in poison, and everyone at that table knew it. The air thickened. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I forced a smile and nodded, but inside something snapped, not loudly, but like a thread, pulled too tight. After dinner, while I cleared the plates, Eleanor followed me into the kitchen. You did well, she said softly, almost kindly. I'm proud of you. For a second, I felt something like relief until she added, see what happens when you apply yourself. It was always like that, build you up, then remind you she's the one who decides when you're enough. I laughed quietly, though it wasn't from humor. Thank you, I said, and placed the last plate in the sink. Her gaze lingered on me, studying my reaction. I hope this dinner teaches you something, she said. I turned to her. Like what? That being a good wife, she said, means more than love. It means competence, reliability, usefulness. There it was again, that word, the ghost of it, useless, always hovering, waiting to be implied. When she left that night, the house felt colder than before. Daniel hugged me. She really liked it, he said, smiling. You saw how happy she was. I smiled too, but my chest was tight. Yes, I said. She was thrilled. But what I didn't tell him was that I'd seen her hand tremble slightly when she'd lifted the glass, that brief flicker of vulnerability she'd never let anyone else notice. It wasn't just control, it was fear of losing it. And I couldn't stop thinking about what Margaret had said. She turns love into a project because she's terrified of being irrelevant. That night, as I was cleaning the dishes, one of the fine china plates slipped from my hand. It fell, bounced once on the counter, and cracked cleanly in two. I froze, staring at it as though it were a living thing gasping for air. The next morning, Eleanor called. I left something behind, she said, her tone crisp. Can I come by? When she arrived, her eyes immediately found the broken plate resting on the counter. Oh dear, she said, voice flat. It's a shame. That set was priceless. I'm sorry, I whispered. She smiled faintly. Accidents happen. Still, it's symbolic, isn't it, fragility? I met her gaze, something hard rising in me for the first time. Maybe it's not fragility, I said quietly. Maybe it's release. She looked almost startled, then laughed softly. Careful, dear. Don't start believing you can read metaphors. But I could. I understood perfectly. Something had cracked, and it wasn't just porcelain. They say silence can be louder than shouting. I used to think that was poetic nonsense until I married Daniel. He didn't need to raise his voice for his indifference to echo through every room. After that dinner, after that single plate shattered and my dignity cracked with it, I realized that his silence was not ignorance, it was permission. It was the soft, smiling nod that let his mother's words keep cutting me open. And yet I loved him, or at least I loved the version of him I believed was still hiding somewhere under all that obedience. In the following weeks, Eleanor seemed to double her visits as if the broken china had given her a reason to supervise. She'd stop by unannounced with casseroles I didn't need, offering help I didn't ask for. Daniel's favorite dish, she'd say, smiling as if she was passing down divine knowledge. I'd watch her set it on the table, see Daniel's eyes light up, and wonder if he ever noticed the subtle message behind her every action, you are mine. He is mine. I tried to tell him once gently. Daniel, I said one night as we brushed our teeth side by side, your mother treats this house like it's hers. He didn't even look up from the mirror. She's just trying to help. Help, I said, my voice catching. She's rewriting my life. He sighed, rinsed his mouth, and finally met my eyes. You're exaggerating. You always take things so personally. That's the moment something broke inside me, not as loud as glass, but deeper. Because that's what complicity sounds like, dismissal disguised as calm. He didn't defend her, but he didn't defend me either. He lived in a fragile truce where my pain was just background noise. I started noticing how often he quoted her. Mom says, Mom thinks. Mom always told me. It was as if his thoughts came with her watermark. I remember one afternoon I suggested we repaint the living room, brighten it up a little. He hesitated. Mom doesn't like bright walls, he said. She says neutral colors are timeless. I laughed sharp, hollow laughter. Well, she doesn't live here. He frowned, genuinely puzzled. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said slowly, I'd like to have a home that reflects us, not her. He looked away. You're being dramatic. I think that's when I realized the truth. His mother wasn't my rival. She was my replacement. He'd married me, but he'd never really left her house. One evening, I caught Eleanor going through our mail. She didn't even flinch when I walked in, just sorting things, she said. Daniel's always so busy. I'm helping, I repeated. By opening our bills, she smiled. You mean his bills. I'm just making sure everything's in order. That night, I told Daniel what I saw. He didn't even pretend to be shocked. She's just being careful, he said. You know how she is. Yes, I knew exactly how she was. What I didn't understand was how he could watch her erase me, piece by piece, and call it love. People still debate whether loyalty to parents should come before loyalty to a spouse. I think it depends on whether that loyalty costs someone else their dignity. I tried to fight back at first with small acts of defiance. I changed the dinner menu without asking her opinion, switched the curtains, reorganized the kitchen drawers she'd arranged. Each time she'd notice. Each time she'd smile. You're learning, she'd say, her tone smooth and threatening. It wasn't a compliment, it was a dare. Then, one morning, Daniel left his phone on the counter while he showered. A text popped up. Don't let her overspend again, she's not practical. It was from Eleanor. My stomach twisted as I scrolled up dozens of messages, all written, like memos from a manager to her subordinate. She doesn't understand priorities. Keep your savings separate. Be careful what you share with her. When Daniel came out, I was holding the phone. What is this? I asked, my voice trembling. He froze. Why are you going through my messages? That's what you're worried about, I said. Not the fact that your mother's treating our marriage like a business she's auditing. He ran a hand through his hair. She just worries about money. She doesn't worry, she controls. And you let her. He took a step toward me. You're making this harder than it has to be. Harder, I whispered. Daniel, I'm fighting for space in my own home. He said nothing, just walked away. That's the thing about men like him. They don't argue to win. They withdraw to avoid. But avoidance is its own kind of betrayal. That night, I lay awake listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator, wondering when exactly love had turned into a one-sided negotiation. I thought about all the women before me, wives, daughters-in-law, caretakers, who'd been told that endurance was a virtue. Maybe it was. But sometimes endurance is just the pretty word for surrender. The next morning, I decided to stop talking about my pain to people who benefited from my silence. Instead, I started watching, listening, paying attention to details. That's when I noticed the envelope hidden beneath a stack of old magazines in Daniel's study. A letter, addressed to his mother, written in his handwriting. It wasn't sealed. I hesitated, heart pounding. You ever feel that moment when you know opening something will change your life, but you do it anyway? That was mine. The first line read, I'm trying, Mom, but she doesn't make it easy. By the time I reached the last line, my hands were shaking. Sometimes I wonder if you were right, if she really isn't the partner I need. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. Then very quietly, I folded it back and slid it under the magazines exactly where I found it. He didn't need to know I'd read it, not yet. Because for the first time, I wasn't crying. I was planning. It started like any ordinary afternoon, the kind where the air in the house feels heavy with unspoken things. Daniel was out with clients, or so he said, and Eleanor had decided to take a rest in the guest room after another morning of rearranging my cabinets. I was cleaning his study, pretending to care about dusting the bookshelves just to have something to do with my hands. That's when I saw it, a manila envelope tucked behind a stack of old tax papers in the bottom drawer of his desk. It wasn't the same one I'd found before. This one had my name on it. I froze. My first thought was guilt, that heavy, instinctive shame of crossing into forbidden territory. But something inside me, maybe intuition, maybe exhaustion, told me that letter was meant to be found. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor's, neat, deliberate, the kind that looks carved rather than written. I unfolded it carefully, half expecting venom, half hoping for remorse. What I found was something worse. Daniel, my dear, I know you're struggling. I see the disappointment in your eyes when you look at her. It's not your fault. Some women are just born without purpose. Don't let guilt trap you. Protect what's yours. Keep the accounts separate, as I advised. Remember, you're the only carver left who understands responsibility. My hands began to tremble. I kept reading every word, carving deeper into my chest. She will resent you for being stable when she is not. Don't let her make you her project, and if you must let her go quietly when the time comes, a man like you deserves freedom. There was no signature, just the faint trace of her perfume, lilac, and control. I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper, feeling my pulse in my ears. It's one thing to suspect you're being judged. It's another to read your condemnation in ink. This wasn't about disapproval anymore, it was a campaign. And my husband, whether he realized it or not, was her willing soldier. That night, I placed the letter back exactly where I found it. But I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows move across the ceiling and wondered how many years of my life had been stolen by politeness. I realized I'd been fighting the wrong war. It wasn't between her and me, it was between who I'd become and who I used to be. The next morning, I brewed her favorite tea, Earl Grey, with a slice of lemon and carried it to the guest room. She was sitting by the window, sewing, as always, pretending not to notice the sound of my footsteps. "For you," I said, setting the cup down. She looked up, surprised. "How thoughtful." I smiled, sitting across from her. "I found your letter." For the first time since I'd met her, Eleanor's hands stopped moving. The needle hung midair. "What letter?" she asked, voice soft, but her eyes gave her away, wide, sharp, assessing. "The one you wrote to Daniel," I said calmly. "The one where you told him to let me go quietly." She blinked once, twice. "You shouldn't go through other people's things," she said finally. "You shouldn't write about them as if they're objects," I replied. A silence stretched between us. Outside, the wind picked up, making the curtains flutter. She looked out the window, then back at me. "You've misunderstood," she said. I was trying to protect him. Marriage can be complicated. Not everyone is built for it. I leaned forward. "And who gets to decide who's built for it? You." Her jaw tightened. "Someone has to." That was it. The confession without the guilt. Her logic was terrifyingly simple. She believed she was saving Daniel from me, from my independence, from my voice, from the audacity to exist outside her control. I stood up slowly. "You know, I said I used to think you hated me, but now I see you don't even see me. You see a threat to your version of perfect." Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Perfection keeps families together, dear. Chaos tears them apart. "And what if the perfection is the chaos?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. She just looked at me, long, cold, unreadable, and I realized that was her real power, not her words, but her ability to stay composed while you fell apart. Later that evening, I told Daniel about the letter. I didn't show it to him yet. I wanted to see his raw reaction first. "Your mother wrote to you about me," I said. "She thinks I'm useless." He froze, his face paling slightly. "Where did you get that idea?" "I read it," I said. "Her handwriting, her perfume, her poison." He rubbed his forehead. "You shouldn't have gone through my things. I shouldn't have to defend myself in my own marriage," I snapped. He tried to calm me. "You're overreacting." That phrase again. It was his shield, his safe word. And hearing it now, after everything, made something inside me go utterly still. "I'm not overreacting, Daniel," I said quietly. "I'm remembering what he asked. That love doesn't mean loyalty when it's built on silence." He looked at me confused, but I could see it, the flicker of guilt he tried to hide. He knew the letter existed. He just never thought I'd find it. That night, after he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at a blank sheet of paper. My hand stopped shaking for the first time in months. I picked up a pen. If Eleanor could write her truth, so could I. Mine wouldn't be a plea. It wouldn't be revenge. It would be a record, a quiet, unflinching mirror held up to everything we had become. And when I was done, I'd leave it where they couldn't avoid it. It was one of those nights that feel endless, the kind where silence hums louder than any noise. The clock ticked, the refrigerator purred, and the pen in my hand trembled over the paper as if it too was afraid of what I was about to write. I didn't light the big lamp. I kept only the dim glow above the stove. The shadows felt safer. Maybe because they didn't judge. Maybe because they reminded me that darkness, unlike people, never pretends to be kind. I started the letter 3 times before I found the right first line. The first draft was angry, sharp, defensive, raw. I tore it up. The second was sorrowful, almost pleading. That one went into the trash too. It wasn't until the third attempt that the words came out honest, stripped of pride or desperation. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I'm finally done trying to prove I belong in a place that keeps telling me I don't. This isn't a goodbye out of anger. It's one born from exhaustion. As I wrote, I realized I wasn't speaking only to him. I was writing to his mother, to every silence I'd swallowed, to every version of myself I'd buried under politeness. My handwriting wavered, but my thoughts didn't. Your mother calls me useless. Maybe she's right by her definition. I'm not useful in the way she measures women, by obedience, by control, by how small they can make themselves to fit someone else's comfort. But I am not empty, Daniel. I am tired of being tested like a student who never passes. I am not your project, your redemption, or your peace treaty. I paused, letting my hand rest on the cool surface of the table. My reflection on the kettle caught my eye, faint, warped, but mine. I kept writing. I've watched her manipulate you into thinking love must be managed like an inheritance, guarded, divided, distributed carefully to avoid conflict. But love doesn't run out, Daniel. It just dies when it's starved. I didn't marry your mother's version of you. I married the man who once looked at me and said he wanted a partner, not a shadow. I don't know where that man went. Maybe he's still here, buried under her voice. My eyes blurred, but I didn't stop. I'm not angry at her anymore. That's the strangest part. I pity her. I understand now control is her way of surviving a world that once left her powerless, but I refuse to inherit that curse. I won't spend my life proving my usefulness to people who never planned to see me as whole. I'm not leaving you. I'm leaving the version of us that stopped existing the moment silence became your favorite answer. I remember laughing softly through my tears at that line. It sounded almost poetic, and yet it was painfully true. I wrote for another hour, my words flowing faster now, freer. Maybe someday when she's gone and the house feels too big and too quiet, you'll remember how it felt to sit in a room where someone loved you without conditions. Maybe you'll realize that peace doesn't come from control. It comes from understanding. I hope you find that someday. I hope she does too. Then I added the one line that mattered most. If I'm useless to her, then let me be useless somewhere I can breathe. When I finished, I sat in silence. The kitchen clock read 2:14 a.m. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it on the counter right beside the sugar bowl Eleanor always used for her tea. I didn't plan to leave that night. I wasn't running away. I just wanted them to see the truth written plainly without interruption, without the shield of manners. But fate loves irony. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement in the hallway, soft footsteps, a glass clinking, then the sound of a light switch. Eleanor was up. I stayed still, pretending to tidy the counter as she entered. She was wearing her robe, her hair perfectly in place even at that hour. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. Her eyes fell on the envelope. "What's that?" I froze. "Nothing important." She walked over, her hand hovering above it. "You wrote something?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, for Daniel." She tilted her head. "May I?" Every instinct in me said no, but a part of me, maybe the exhausted, defiant part, said yes. "Go ahead." She unfolded the letter and began to read. Her face didn't move at first. Her expression stayed locked, cold, unreadable. But as her eyes traced line after line, something shifted. Her shoulders stiffened, her lips parted slightly, and her hand trembled just once before she steadied it. When she finished, she didn't look up immediately. The silence stretched so long that I started to wonder if she'd say nothing at all. Finally, she whispered, "You don't know what it's like." "Then tell me," I said quietly. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw something raw, fear, maybe, or guilt, hiding under pride. I lost everything once she said. My husband, my home, my reputation. Do you know what people said, that I was weak, that I'd failed as a wife? I swore no woman in this family would ever be humiliated again. So you humiliate others instead, I asked. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. Better me than him, she whispered. Daniel doesn't see the world for what it is. He's too trusting. You'll ruin him. Her conviction shook me, not because it was cruel, but because she believed it. She genuinely thought she was saving him from me, from my independence, from love that didn't bow. I'm not your enemy, I said softly. You built one in your mind because you needed control more than peace. She shook her head. You wouldn't understand. Then help me, I said. Help me understand. She looked away. I can't. And with that, she left the kitchen clutching the letter. I thought she'd destroy it, maybe even hide it, but she didn't. At dawn, Daniel woke me up gently. His eyes were red, his voice quiet. Mom gave me your letter, he said. She said I should read it. My heart stopped. She gave it to you. He nodded. She didn't say anything else, just left it on my nightstand. He sat down beside me, the letter trembling in his hand. I didn't know you felt this way, he whispered. I wanted to say, how could you not? But I stayed silent. He read it aloud, every word, his voice breaking once, twice. When he reached the line about silence being his favorite answer, he stopped. Tears slipped down his cheeks, quiet and unforced. Eleanor was standing in the doorway. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes were wet, her hands clutching the frame as if to hold herself up. For once, the house was utterly still, no accusations, no corrections, just the fragile sound of realization settling like dust. When he finished reading, Daniel looked up at her. Is this what you wanted? He asked. His tone wasn't angry. It was broken. She opened her mouth but couldn't form words. A single tear slid down her cheek. I didn't gloat. I didn't move. I just stood there watching the two of them finally see each other without the veil of my silence between them. He set the letter down carefully, like something sacred. I'm sorry, he said. I believed him. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. Eleanor turned and walked away quietly, slowly, as if carrying the weight of every word she'd ever said. That was the last night she stayed in our house. The next morning, I found the letter back on the counter. She'd added one line at the bottom in her handwriting, just 6 words. You were never useless to him. It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. There are moments in life that unfold in slow motion, like your senses are both heightened and detached, recording every tiny sound and gesture as if your mind knows it must never forget. That morning was one of those moments. Daniel sat at the edge of our bed, the letter resting on his knees, sunlight cutting through the curtains in narrow bands that divided his face between light and shadow. I stood a few feet away, barefoot, arms crossed, half afraid to move, as though any sound might shatter what was left of us. He started to read again, this time not to himself, but to me, maybe to make the words real, maybe to confess them aloud so they couldn't be buried anymore. His voice was unsteady at first, then steady, then trembling again. I'd written those words, but hearing them echoed back in his tone, low, cracked, full of guilt, made them feel heavier than I ever imagined. Every sentence became a mirror showing him what he'd refused to see. When he reached the line about his mother, his breath caught. You've let her speak for you so long that I don't know what your voice sounds like anymore. He stopped, eyes darting up to me as if he'd just seen his reflection for the first time. Did you really think that? He asked quietly. I didn't think it, I said. I lived it. He looked down, biting his lip, eyes glassy. I thought keeping peace meant protecting everyone. Peace built on silence isn't peace, I said. It's paralysis. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words died before they reached his mouth. Then he kept reading. Every few sentences, he'd pause sometimes just to breathe, sometimes to whisper an apology that dissolved before it reached me. At one point, Eleanor appeared in the doorway again. I hadn't even heard her come in. She was dressed composed as always, but her eyes looked hollow as if something had been scooped out from behind them. She said nothing, didn't try to defend herself. She just stood there, hands clasped tightly, staring at Daniel as he read. When he reached the final lines, his voice broke completely. If I'm useless to her, then let me be useless somewhere I can breathe. He couldn't finish the last sentence. His hand went to his mouth, and he let out a sound I'd never heard from him before, not crying, not a sob exactly, but something primal, a sound of recognition and regret blending into one. I didn't move toward him. For once, I didn't rush to soothe or fix or comfort. I let him feel it, the weight I had carried alone for years. Eleanor turned away, slightly pressing a hand to her lips. I saw her shoulders trembling. A woman who prided herself on elegance, composure, restraint, now reduced to quiet, uncontrollable shaking. It wasn't rage. It wasn't pride. It was grief, the kind that comes when you realize your cruelty has finally spoken back to you. When Daniel looked up again, tears streaked his face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I did, I whispered. "You just weren't listening." He nodded slowly, like a man trying to understand a language he once knew but forgot. "I don't know who I've been," he said. "You've been hers," I said softly. "You've been good, obedient, safe, but never free." Eleanor's voice came suddenly, brittle but clear. "Don't blame me for this." Daniel turned to her eyes raw. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just seeing you." That stopped her. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. She just stood there, her face hardening to hide the cracks. "Daniel," I said quietly, "it's not about blame. It's about truth." He nodded again, looking between us like a man finally noticing the battlefield he'd been living in. "I don't even know how to fix this," he said. "You don't," I replied. "You just stop pretending it's not broken." We sat in silence. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker, but cleaner somehow, like a storm had passed through and carried away something toxic. After a while, Daniel reached for my hand. His fingers were cold, tentative. I didn't pull away, but I didn't hold on either. I just let him touch the space between forgiveness and distance. Eleanor turned and walked out quietly, the soft pad of her slippers fading down the hallway. I listened to the faint creak of the stairs, the click of the front door opening, the muffled sound of the car engine starting. For the first time, she didn't look back. That night, Daniel and I ate dinner in silence. The same table, the same plates minus one broken piece. Only this time, there were no small talk distractions, no clinking glasses, no politeness to mask what we were feeling. The air was thick with all the things that could finally be said, but didn't need to be anymore. After dinner, he reached across the table. "She's gone to stay with my aunt for a while," he said. "She said she needs time." "So do we," I replied. He nodded. "I'll understand if you need space." I smiled faintly. Space isn't the problem. Absence is. That night, I didn't sleep beside him. I took my blanket and moved to the couch. It wasn't out of spite, it was just quieter there. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I woke up to the sound of him whispering my name from the doorway. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "Then find yourself," I murmured. In the days that followed, something changed in him. He stopped calling his mother 3 times a day. He started asking questions not about chores or meals, but about me. He noticed things: how I liked my tea lukewarm, how I always hummed when nervous. Small details, but real. Still, I knew healing wouldn't come easily. Trust doesn't rebuild like furniture. It grows back in uneven pieces. I started writing again, not letters this time, but small notes to myself folded and hidden around the house. "You are not invisible. You are not her. You are free to love without permission." A week later, I found an envelope on my pillow in Daniel's handwriting. For a moment, my stomach dropped old fear muscle memory. But inside wasn't another accusation. It was a reply to my letter. "You were right. Silence is comfort for cowards. I've been one. I let love become obedience because I was too afraid of losing both of you. I see now that in trying to protect peace, I became the war. I don't deserve forgiveness yet, but I'll earn it even if it takes the rest of my life." It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the pain, but it was a start. Eleanor didn't call for a long time. Weeks passed. Then one Sunday morning, a small package arrived at our door with her handwriting on the label. Inside was a single plate from the heirloom set wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Beneath it, a note, "For when you decide to set a new table." I stood there staring at it, unsure whether to cry or laugh. It was her way apology by metaphor. Still proud, still indirect, but softer. It wasn't closure, but maybe it was an opening. That evening, Daniel and I placed that single plate at the center of the table like a symbol, not of tradition, but of survival. We didn't talk much. We just sat there breathing, existing in the fragile calm that comes after years of noise. People say letters are outdated, that words on paper can't change people. But that night, as the candlelight flickered across that gold-trimmed porcelain, I knew they were wrong. Because a letter had broken the silence that generations had built. It had turned guilt into reflection and obedience into choice. I don't know if Eleanor ever forgave herself. I don't know if Daniel ever fully became the man I married, but I know the woman who was once called useless had finally written her worth into history, inked not in apology but in truth. And truth once spoken never goes back to sleep. The morning after Daniel read the letter felt like waking up in a different house. The same walls stood, the same furniture waited, but the silence had changed its texture. It was lighter somehow, not gone, not yet, but breathable. I walked through the rooms, slowly touching surfaces, like a stranger reacquainting herself with a place she'd once called home. There was no trace of Eleanor's perfume, no faint echo of her voice drifting down the hallway. Even the air smelled new, as though the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Daniel was already in the kitchen making coffee. I watched him quietly, unsure how to enter this unfamiliar calm. He looked up when he heard me and smiled, tired, genuine, small. "Good morning," he said. I nodded. "Morning." He poured a cup for me without asking how I wanted it. For years that had irritated me, his assumption that my preferences never changed. But this time, when I took the cup, it was perfect. Just the right amount of milk, just the right warmth. I took a sip, and for the first time, it tasted like he'd been paying attention. We sat at the table for a long while, the clock ticking softly between us. Neither of us spoke at first. There was too much to say and not enough strength to say it. When he finally did speak, his voice was low. "She called last night." I set the cup down. "And she's staying with Aunt Mabel for a few weeks," he said. "She wants to reflect." He hesitated on the last word, as if unsure it belonged to his mother's vocabulary. I nodded slowly. "That's good," he sighed. "She asked me something strange." "What?" "She asked if you'd ever come visit her. Not soon, but someday." I looked up, startled. "She said that—" He nodded. "And she said, she's sorry. She couldn't say it directly, but I could hear it. I think reading your letter broke something in her, but maybe that's the only way she could change." I sat back in my chair, letting the words sink in. It's strange how apologies work, not always spoken, sometimes written in tone, in pauses, in small acts that don't look like remorse, but smell like it. I didn't know if I could forgive her yet, but I knew I didn't hate her anymore. Daniel reached across the table, hesitating before taking my hand. His palm was warm and trembling. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me before I understood what I'd done." I smiled faintly. I did give up Daniel. But the letter didn't come from anger. It came from what was left after it. He nodded, eyes wet. "Then maybe that's what love is, what survives after the anger burns away." We sat there a while longer, listening to the morning. Birds chirped outside. Somewhere a car door slammed, a dog barked. Life moved on. It was peaceful in a way that felt unfamiliar, like a song you haven't heard in years, but somehow still remember the tune. Later, as I cleaned up the breakfast dishes, I found that single heirloom plate Eleanor had sent resting on the shelf. The gold trim caught the morning light and shimmered faintly. It didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt earned. People still debate whether forgiveness is weakness or strength. I think it's neither. I think forgiveness is just the point when you stop wishing for a different past. That night, Daniel suggested we start fresh, literally. "Let's repaint the living room," he said, smiling sheepishly. "Bright colors this time. Something that feels like us." I laughed softly. "Your mother won't like that. She doesn't live here anymore," he said simply. And that was it, the quiet declaration that finally ended the invisible war. Over the next few weeks, the house changed little by little. The walls became pale blue instead of beige. The curtains were replaced. We gave away some of Eleanor's old furniture, the ones she'd insisted were family pieces. For the first time, the space looked like two people lived there, not one, and her ghost. I also began working again, taking on projects at the design firm that had once offered me that small freelance job. This time I accepted it without asking Daniel's opinion. When I showed him my first finished layout, he smiled. "You're incredible," he said. "Mom would—" He stopped himself mid-sentence. I'm proud of you." I laughed. "That's enough." We didn't talk much about the letter after that. It lived in a drawer by my bedside, folded neatly, still smelling faintly of ink and lemon cleaner. but every now and then I'd catch Daniel glancing toward it like a man who'd read a holy text he wasn't ready to quote aloud. Months passed before I saw Eleanor again. It was at a family gathering, her sister's birthday, I think. She looked smaller somehow, not weaker, but lighter, as if something she'd been carrying had finally been set down. When she saw me, she hesitated, then approached slowly. "Hello, dear," she said. I smiled politely. "Hello, Mrs. Carver." She winced slightly. "Eleanor, please." I nodded. "Eleanor." She handed me a small, wrapped box. "A gift," she said softly. "Nothing symbolic this time, I promise." Inside was a simple silver pen, elegant, timeless, no message attached. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely surprised. She nodded. "You write beautifully. I thought you should have a better instrument for it. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get. And somehow, it was enough." Later, as I watched her and Daniel talk quietly in the corner, I realized something profound healing doesn't happen through grand gestures. It happens in small, consistent acts of humility. A softer tone, a slower reply, a simple acknowledgement of pain. The Carver family would never be perfect, but perfection wasn't the goal anymore. Peace was. That night, after everyone had gone home, Daniel and I sat outside under the porch light, sharing the last of the wine. "Do you ever regret writing that letter?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "No," I said. "It wasn't just a letter, it was a mirror. We all needed to see ourselves." He nodded, watching the sky. "I'm glad you didn't walk away," I smiled. "Maybe I did, Daniel, but you followed." He laughed softly, and for the first time in years, I believed the sound. It was real. As the night deepened, I thought about how everything had started with a dinner, a single insult, a quiet war of glances and words. How strange it was that the thing that finally ended it wasn't shouting or confrontation, but a few pages of truth written under a dim kitchen light. Maybe that's how change always begins, not with thunder, but with ink. When I went to bed that night, the house felt peaceful. Not empty, not silent, just alive. I drifted to sleep knowing that tomorrow I'd wake up not as the woman struggling to earn approval, but as someone who had reclaimed her own story. And maybe, somewhere in another quiet house miles away, Eleanor was rereading that letter, not as an accusation, but as a reminder that even the sharpest words can sometimes carve a path toward grace. People say families are built on love. I think they're built on understanding. And when understanding finally enters the room, love follows quietly behind it. Humble, imperfect, but real. Good night, and thank you for listening to my story.